Earth species, each with its own unique culture and history. But among them, the Tsilians were a species that had once known great power, only to see it slip away. Their empire had expanded across the stars, their technology far advanced, their armies unbeatable. For centuries, they ruled over vast territories, their name feared and respected by others. But that all changed in a matter of years. The downfall began slowly. First, their allies began to distance themselves, citing political disagreements or resource scarcity. Then came the economic collapse, as the Tsilian homeworld's once rich resources began to dwindle. What followed was even worse: the betrayal. One by one, the species they had once called friends turned their backs on them. Treaties were broken. Trade routes were severed. Even their most trusted allies joined the other side, abandoning them to struggle on their own. The Tsilians were devastated, both physically and emotionally. They had been powerful once, but now they were isolated, stranded on a planet that could no longer sustain them. The great cities they had built, with their gleaming spires and powerful infrastructure, began to crumble. Their once thriving agriculture faltered, and their people were left to fight over the last scraps of food and water. Among the ruins of the capital city, Elder Joran stood in the middle of a crumbling plaza, staring out at the desolate horizon. His heart was heavy. He had lived through the rise and fall of the Tsilian Empire, but never had he seen his people so broken, so helpless. He had sent messages to the other species, hoping for a glimmer of mercy, but no one had responded. The silence was deafening. The Tsilians were being forgotten. Joran clenched his fists in frustration. How did we fall so far? He muttered to himself. He looked around at the few survivors, some trying to repair the broken infrastructure, others scavenging for food. Their faces were filled with despair, but none spoke their fear aloud. They all knew the truth. Without help, they would soon be extinct. As the days passed, Joran's hope faded. The Tsilians were on the brink of extinction, and no one seemed willing to lift a finger. The other species had grown too powerful and too busy to care about the fate of a once mighty race. The Tsilian leadership met in secret, discussing their options, but there were no good choices. Their allies were gone. Their resources were almost depleted. The future seemed bleak. Then, one day, a strange signal was intercepted. It wasn't from any known species, and it wasn't like any message they had ever received before. It was short, simple, and direct. We are here to help. Humanity stands ready to assist. Joran and the rest of the leadership council were stunned. Humanity. They had heard of Earth, a small planet inhabited by a relatively young species. They had never imagined they would ever need to rely on them. But there it was, a message from a species they knew nothing about, offering help. For hours, they debated whether it was a trap or a genuine offer. No other species had helped them. So why would this one? But after considering the dire situation they were in, they realized they had nothing to lose. They had to take the risk. Joran sent a response, cautiously at first. He explained the Tsilian plight, their desperation, and their need for resources. He made it clear that they would not tolerate deceit. If the humans wanted to help, they would have to prove their worth. A few days later, another message arrived, this time with a more detailed plan. The humans were sending a fleet of ships, equipped with advanced technology, medical supplies, and agricultural tools. They promised to provide whatever help was needed to restore the Tsilian civilization. The message was clear. We offer this help not for power or gain, but out of empathy and the desire to see you thrive once again. Joran was still skeptical, but there was a spark of hope in his heart. Could it be true? Could a species like humanity really care enough to help them? The thought was almost too good to believe, but it was the only chance they had left. The Tsilian Council decided to accept the offer, despite the uncertainty. There was no other choice. They had to trust in humanity, or they would perish. As the human ships approached the Tsilian homeworld, Joran stood on the balcony of his palace, watching the skies. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe that Scythians weren't truly alone in the universe after all. The galaxy was vast and full of div. He didn't know what humanity wanted or why they had chosen to help. But as he watched the human fleet descend into the atmosphere, he made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to ensure that this second chance wasn't wasted. The Scythians would rise again, this time, with the help of humanity. The day the human fleet arrived was a day the Scythians would never forget. For weeks, the skies above their dying world had remained silent, filled only with the remnants of their own thoughts and fading hope. But now, a new sound echoed through the atmosphere. The hum of ships, massive, sleek vessels descending through the clouds, their sleek forms cutting through the Scythian sky like a promise of salvation. Zoran stood in the grand courtyard of the Scythian capital, surrounded by his people. The sight of the ships caused a ripple of surprise and disbelief. Despite the message that had been sent, the Scythians still couldn't bring themselves to fully trust the humans. They had been abandoned by everyone else, so how could they possibly believe that this new species was any different? The other species in the galaxy had already shown their true colors. Why would humanity, a species so young and small, come to their aid? Zoran glanced around at the faces of his fellow leaders. Some were filled with hope, while others showed signs of deep concern. The idea of relying on humanity seemed almost absurd. The Scythians had never even considered humans a serious power, but here they were, arriving on the scene as though they were the only ones who could offer help. A few hours later, the human fleet landed on the outskirts of the capital. The ships touched down gracefully, their engines powering down with a soft hum. The Scythians watched in silence, their eyes wide with uncertainty. The human soldiers disembarked, stepping onto the soil of the Scythian homeworld with calm confidence. The humans were not there to conquer. They were there to assist. Zoran, accompanied by his most trusted advisors, walked slowly toward the landing site. The humans' leader, a tall, confident man named Captain Jonathan Hayes, stood at the forefront of the human delegation. His uniform was plain but well-maintained, his expression earnest. When he saw Zoran and the other Scythian leaders approaching, he stepped forward and extended his hand in a gesture of peace. Zoran hesitated, studying the human leader's face. There was no arrogance, no hint of superiority, just sincerity. With a deep breath, Zoran reached out and grasped Captain Hayes' hand. "We welcome you, Captain," Zoran said, his voice cautious but grateful. "But I must admit, we still have many questions. Why have you come to us? Why would a species so young, so distant, care about the survival of the Scythians?" Captain Hayes smiled warmly, his eyes filled with empathy. "We came because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. "Humanity believes that no species, no matter how far removed, should be left to fade away in silence. We've seen what can happen when civilizations fall, and we know that if we don't act, more lives will be lost. We're not here for power, wealth, or resources. We're here because we care, because we believe in helping those who need it." Zoran listened carefully. The words seemed genuine, but he was still cautious. He had seen too many empty promises before. "And what do you want from us in return?" he asked. "Surely there must be something you expect." Captain Hayes' smile faded slightly, but his resolve remained. "All we ask is your cooperation," he said. "We have the technology, resources, and knowledge to help your people recover. We don't want to take anything from you. We just want to see your world thrive again. But in return, we hope to build a lasting partnership between our people, a partnership based on trust, mutual respect, and collaboration." Zoran was silent for a long moment. It was the first time in many years that someone had spoken to him like this, without an agenda, without expecting anything in return. The Scythians had been betrayed time and time again, but something in Captain Hayes' words touched a deep chord within him. The hope that had been buried in his heart began to stir once more. "We need your help," Joran said finally, his voice steady. "But there is much we must rebuild. Our people are starving. Our cities are falling apart. If you are truly willing to help, we will need everything you can provide. Not just technology, but knowledge, skills, resources, and most of all, time." "We're ready," Captain Hayes assured him. "We'll start right away. Our teams will begin working with your people to restore what's been lost. We have agricultural experts, engineers, medical teams, all at your disposal." Joran nodded. This was the opportunity that Salians had been waiting for. For the first time in years, there was a chance for a brighter future. But deep down, he still couldn't shake the lingering doubt. Was it really that simple? Could humanity really be as good as they seemed? Captain Hayes seemed to sense Joran's hesitation. "I know it's hard to trust us," he said gently. "But we're here for you. We'll prove ourselves through our actions, not our words." Joran looked out across the city, seeing his people, their faces filled with both hope and skepticism. "We will give you a chance," he said finally. "But know this, if we are to trust you, it will not be easily earned." Captain Hayes nodded in agreement. "We understand. But we will do everything in our power to help your people recover. Together, we can build something stronger than before." As the human team began to unload their equipment and prepare to assist the Xilians, Joran couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope for the first time in a long while. Perhaps humanity wasn't so different from them after all. Perhaps this was the beginning of something truly extraordinary. For the Xilians, it was a chance to rebuild, to recover, and to forge a future they never thought possible. The days following the arrival of the human fleet were filled with activity and change. For the Xilians, it was a whirlwind of emotions, uncertainty mixed with a growing sense of hope. Their world, once full of pride and strength, was now on the edge of collapse. Yet here was humanity, offering their help without asking for anything in return. It was a rare gesture in a galaxy where alliances were often formed out of necessity, not compassion. The Xilian capital, which had been in disrepair for years, now saw a steady stream of human engineers, doctors, and agricultural specialists. The once empty streets filled with the sounds of machines working, medical teams tending to the sick, and farmers planting crops where there had been nothing but dust and drought. Joran walked through the city, observing the transformation. Human workers had already begun to repair the city's water systems, and the fields around the capital were beginning to bloom once more, thanks to the advanced farming technology humanity had brought with them. It was nothing short of a miracle. As he walked, he was joined by Captain Jonathan Hayes. The human leader had been by his side throughout the process, working tirelessly to ensure that the Xilian people received everything they needed. "You've done so much already," Joran said, his voice filled with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "I never imagined it could be possible. How did your people manage all of this?" Captain Hayes smiled, his eyes reflecting the pride of his people. "Humanity is a species born from struggle. We've faced many challenges ourselves. That's why we understand how important it is to help those in need. We don't just give technology. We share knowledge, skills, and resources. We've learned that the only way to survive in this galaxy is by working together." Joran nodded, the weight of those words sinking in. The Xilians had once believed in their superiority, thinking they could stand alone, without needing help from others. Now, they were realizing the truth. No species, no matter how great, could survive without cooperation, and humanity had shown them that. As they reached the edge of the city, Joran paused to look at the lush fields that stretched out before him. The soil, which had been barren for so long, was now rich and fertile again, thanks to the human agricultural technology. Crops of all kinds were growing, from grains to fruits, and the Xilian people were beginning to look healthier, their faces less drawn with hunger. "We have always been a proud species," Joran said softly, his gaze fixed on the fields. But pride alone cannot feed a people. We have learned it the hard way. Captain Hayes placed a hand on his shoulder. It's never too late to learn something new. You've already taken the first step. The rest is just a matter of trust and patience. Over the next few weeks, the humans worked side by side with the Xilians. The Xilian people, once hesitant and distrustful, began to warm to their new allies. They saw the humans' commitment, their determination to make a difference, and their willingness to sacrifice for the good of others. It was a stark contrast to the self-interested politics of the other species in the galaxy. In the medical tents, human doctors worked alongside Xilian healers. They shared techniques, comparing their medical knowledge and improving the care that was provided. Xilian children, once thin and sickly from lack of proper nutrition, began to regain their strength, and the elderly, who had once been left to fend for themselves, were given new hope. Even more remarkable was the way the human engineers worked with Xilian builders to reconstruct the capital's infrastructure. What had once been a broken city was now seeing the early stages of revival. Roads were repaired, buildings were reinforced, and energy grids were brought back online, all thanks to the collaboration between the two species. But it wasn't just the physical work that made a difference. Captain Hayes and Joran spent long hours talking about the future of their people. They shared their histories, their dreams, and their hopes for what was to come. Joran began to see humanity in a new light, not as a species from a small, insignificant planet, but as a powerful force for good. Perhaps we were wrong, Joran said one evening, as he and Captain Hayes sat on the balcony overlooking the city. Maybe we were wrong to think that we could survive alone. Maybe the galaxy is stronger when we work together. Hayes smiled. It's a lesson we've all learned, Joran. We're stronger when we help each other. It's the only way. In the days that followed, the Xilians continued to rebuild, with humanity by their side. The once proud empire that had fallen into disrepair was slowly finding its way back. The fields were lush, the cities were alive, and the people, though still cautious, had begun to believe in the possibility of a future. The bond between the two species grew stronger every day. The Xilians, who had once seen themselves as the dominant force in the galaxy, now saw that true power didn't come from might alone. It came from cooperation, from mutual respect, and from the willingness to help those in need. Joran stood at the edge of the city, watching as the sun set over the horizon. The human ships had not only brought technology and resources, but had also brought something far more valuable: hope. The Xilians were not alone anymore. They had found allies in the most unlikely of places. And for the first time in a long while, Joran allowed himself to believe that the Xilian people could rise again, not on their own, but with the help of those who had shown them what it truly meant to be strong. Humanity had not only saved them, they had shown them the path to a better future. And for that, Joran would forever be grateful. As the days passed, the bond between the Xilians and the humans deepened. The city continued to come to life, each passing day a testament to what could be achieved when two species worked together with shared purpose. The Xilians, who had once viewed themselves as the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, now found themselves learning new ways of doing things, realizing that even the smallest, youngest species had something valuable to offer. Joran stood at the city's center one morning, watching the crowds as they gathered for the ceremonial event. It was a new tradition they were about to start, a symbol of the cooperation between the Xilians and the humans. The streets were filled with joy and excitement, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that had once ruled the city in its darkest times. Today, they would celebrate the first harvest of crops that had been grown with human technology. The fields, once barren and empty, were now bursting with life. It was not just a harvest. It was a symbol of the new era that had begun. For Joran, it felt like a new chapter in the story of his people, one that he had not dared to hope for in years. "Are you ready for this?" Captain Hayes asked as he approached, his voice full of pride. Joran turned to face him, his expression filled with both gratitude and determination. I never imagined such a day would come. But now it feels possible. You've given us more than crops and resources. You've given us a chance to live again." Hayes smiled, a warmth in his eyes. "It's the least we could do. And I know your people are strong. You'll rebuild everything you've lost, and more." As the ceremony began, the leaders of both species stood on the stage, overlooking the crowd. The people cheered, their faces full of hope and joy. Zillion children, once malnourished and weak, now ran through the streets, their laughter echoing through the air. For the first time in a long time, the future seemed bright. Joran addressed the crowd, his voice steady and strong. "Today, we stand not just as Celians, but as members of a larger family. A family that knows no borders, no walls, no differences. Humanity has shown us what it means to truly care for others. They have offered us the hand of friendship when no one else would." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "We've learned a valuable lesson in these past few weeks. We don't have to be alone in this galaxy. We don't have to let pride stand in the way of what's right. We can rebuild our world, and we will do it together." The crowd erupted in applause, and Joran smiled. His people were beginning to understand the depth of what they had gained. They were no longer standing on the edge of extinction. They were standing at the dawn of a new era. As the ceremony continued, Joran felt a sense of pride in his heart. It wasn't just because they had managed to grow food again, or because the city was slowly being restored. It was because, for the first time, he saw his people working alongside the humans as equals, sharing ideas, learning from one another, and building something lasting together. The Celians had always thought themselves superior, but now they realized that true greatness came from collaboration. It came from humility, and the willingness to accept help when it was needed most. And humanity had proven that to them, every single day. Later that evening, Joran and Captain Hayes stood alone in the quiet courtyard outside the city. The last rays of the sun were fading, leaving a soft glow in the sky. The two of them stood in silence for a moment, watching the people below, who were still celebrating, still hopeful. "You've done more than just help us survive," Joran said quietly, breaking the silence. "You've shown us how to thrive, how to be better. And for that, I will be forever grateful." Hayes nodded. "We didn't do it for thanks, Joran. We did it because we believe in what's possible when we come together. When we help one another, there's nothing we can't overcome." Joran looked at him, his gaze serious. "We've always thought of the galaxy as a place where we were meant to dominate, but now I see it differently. Maybe we were meant to work together, all of us. Maybe that's the real way forward." Hayes smiled again, a proud glint in his eyes. "That's exactly what we believe too. And if you ever need help in the future, you'll have us. Humanity stands with you, always." Joran extended his hand, not as a leader of the Xylians, but as an equal, offering his trust. "Then let us be partners. Together, we will show the galaxy what can be done when species come together for the greater good." Captain Hayes grasped his hand firmly. "Together, Joran. Always." And in that moment, as the stars began to appear in the sky above, both species knew that they were no longer alone. They had found in one another not just allies, but friends. A new era had begun, not just for the Xylians, but for all species who had learned the power of unity and cooperation. The galaxy, once divided, now had the chance to heal and grow together. And it was all thanks to the bond between humanity and the Xylians, two species who had dared to believe in each other when no one else would. Weeks passed, and the bond between the Xylians and the humans grew stronger. The rebuilding process was not easy, but every day brought new progress. The city was becoming a symbol of hope, and the people's spirits were lifting. Yet even as things seemed to be improving, Joran knew that there was still much to be done. The galaxy had a way of throwing challenges when least expected, and he feared that a new test was coming, one that would challenge everything they had built. One morning, As Joran met with Captain Hayes in the central planning hub, a communication came in. It was from the Cillian fleet, which had been stationed in orbit as a sign of solidarity with the humans. The message was brief but urgent. Joran, Captain Hayes said as he read the message, the Cillian fleet reports that an unknown force has entered our system. They are not responding to hails and are approaching quickly. Joran's heart sank. Is it one of the species that abandoned us? He asked, his voice tight with concern. We thought they'd be far away by now. Captain Hayes shook his head. We don't know yet, but we can't take any chances. We need to prepare for whatever this might be. The two leaders exchanged a look. The Cillian fleet had been out of service for years, its ships barely functioning due to years of neglect. But now, with the help of the humans, the fleet had been restored. Still, it wasn't enough to face an unknown threat, especially not with the Cillian people still recovering from their earlier struggles. We should act quickly, Joran said. If this force is hostile, we can't afford to wait. Captain Hayes nodded, then turned to his communications officer. Send word to the fleet. Get the best ships ready and prepare for a possible confrontation. Joran was silent for a moment, deep in thought. He knew that this could be the test of everything they had built so far. If the Cillian people were forced to fight again, would they remember the lessons they had learned? Would they stand together with the humans, or would old pride and fear tear them apart? I'll go to the fleet, Joran said finally. I need to be there. The people need to see that their leader is with them, no matter what happens. Captain Hayes agreed, but his eyes were filled with concern. We'll follow you. Humanity stands by your side, Joran. But remember, we're not just fighting for survival this time. We're fighting for the future we've built together. The two leaders made their way to the docking bay where the fleet was gathering. Human ships and Cillian ships stood side by side, a testament to the trust and cooperation between the two species. Joran felt a pang of pride as he looked at the fleet. The Cillians had once relied solely on their own power, but now they stood united with their human allies. As they boarded the command ship, Joran turned to Captain Hayes. If this force is truly a threat, we will need to fight together as one. No hesitation, no division. Hayes gave him a determined nod. We've learned to trust each other. We won't let anything tear us apart now. The fleet moved quickly, ready for whatever was ahead. Joran stood on the bridge, watching the stars as the ships moved into position. The unknown force was close now, and Joran could feel the tension building. His people had just begun to rebuild, to find hope again. Could they face a new challenge with the same resolve? As the ships drew nearer to the approaching force, the fleet's sensors finally locked onto the unknown vessels. They were large, ominous ships, unlike anything that Cillians had seen before. But as the ships got closer, something unexpected happened. The vessels began to slow, and a transmission came through. Cillian fleet. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was an underlying threat in the tone. We have come to collect what is ours. Joran's heart raced. What do they mean by that? He whispered. Captain Hayes stepped forward. We need to find out. Open the channel. The voice continued. You think you have found salvation in these humans, but you are wrong. The Cillians are weak, and you will learn that the price of betrayal is steep. Surrender now, and we will spare your people. Resist, and you will face destruction. Joran's grip tightened on the armrest. The threat was clear. This was no simple raid. It was an invasion. We won't surrender, Joran said, his voice full of resolve. Humanity has helped us, and we will fight for our future. Captain Hayes stepped up beside him. Together, we will stand. No one is taking this world from us. With a quick gesture, the fleet launched into action. The Cillian ships, though damaged from years of neglect, fought with newfound strength, their human allies beside them. Joran's heart swelled as he watched the coordinated attack. This was the test. This was where they would prove to the galaxy that they were not weak, that they had the strength to defend what they had built together. The battle was fierce, but Joran knew that they had something the invaders didn't. They had unity, they had hope, and most of all, they had each other. As the battle raged on, Joran stood tall, knowing that no matter what happened next, the Scythian people had found a new path forward, a path that could never be taken away. The battle had been raging for hours. Joran stood at the front of the command ship, his eyes fixed on the starry battlefield. The Scythian and human fleets were working in unison, their ships weaving in and out of the enemy's fire. The unknown invaders were powerful, their ships massive and heavily armed. But Joran saw something the enemy didn't: the strength of cooperation. The Scythian ships, though once old and weak, now moved with precision and speed, thanks to the human upgrades. It was a partnership that worked, and Joran knew they were on the verge of victory. But the invaders wouldn't give up so easily. They were relentless, pressing on with all their might, trying to break through the joint forces of Scythian and humanity. Joran, Captain Hayes's voice crackled through the comm. "We've lost 2 of the smaller ships. We need to come up with a plan to break their defenses." Joran's mind raced. The enemy ships were large, but their weapons systems were slow to reload, a weak point that the humans had discovered. If they could exploit that weakness, they could turn the tide. "We need to keep them engaged," Joran said, his voice steady. "We can't let them focus on our ships. Captain, tell your fleet to feint attacks. Draw them out. I'll lead a small group and target their weapon systems directly." "Understood," Captain Hayes replied. "I'll tell them to start immediately." The human and Scythian fleets separated, each ship taking evasive action. Joran's ship, a heavily modified Scythian warship, was positioned at the front. He could feel the tension in the air as his crew prepared for the next phase of the plan. They were in this together, and there was no turning back. "Ready when you are, Joran," his chief engineer said, his fingers dancing over the control panels. "We've got a clear shot at their main weapon port. We just need to get close enough." Joran nodded. "We'll get close. Trust me." With that, they moved into position, drawing closer to the enemy fleet. The invaders hadn't anticipated this move, and their fire began to scatter as they turned their focus to the feinting human ships. Joran's heart pounded in his chest. This was their chance. The target was within reach. "Now," Joran commanded. The ship's weapons fired with precision, hitting the enemy's main weapon port. A burst of energy flared across the battlefield as the ship's weapon systems began to sputter and spark. The invaders' response was swift, but the damage had been done. Their firepower had been significantly reduced. The enemy ships now found themselves at a disadvantage. They were still large and powerful, but without their primary weapons, they were nothing more than sitting targets. Joran's ship, alongside the human fleet, pressed forward, attacking with renewed vigor. For the first time, the invaders began to retreat. Their ships turned, trying to escape the onslaught. Joran felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew they couldn't let up. This was the moment that would decide everything. "We've got them on the run." Captain Hayes's voice came through again. "Keep pushing forward, Joran. Let's finish this." Joran gave a tight nod. "We finish this together." As the remaining enemy ships tried to flee, the combined fleet launched a final, decisive strike. With their main weapon systems disabled and their retreat blocked, the invaders had nowhere to go. One by one, their ships were forced to surrender, their crews defeated and their ships crippled. The battle was won. Joran let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He stood on the bridge, looking out at the debris of the enemy fleet as the silence of victory settled over the battlefield. It wasn't just the Scythians who had won today. Humanity had stood beside them, helping them defend not just their world, but their future. "We did it," Joran whispered, almost in disbelief. "Yes, we did," Captain Hayes replied. Together, the fleets began to return to the planet, the victorious ships flying side by side. As they landed, The people of the planet gathered once again in the city's center, ready to celebrate the victory. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a victory of unity. It was proof that when two species came together, they could accomplish anything. As Joran stood before the crowd, he felt a sense of pride and gratitude. His people had fought for survival, but now they were fighting for something more. They were fighting for a future, and they had won it. Not just for themselves, but for every species that would one day learn from their example. We stand here today, Joran began, his voice ringing out across the crowd, not as Scythians or humans, but as partners. Together, we have faced the darkness and emerged victorious. This victory is proof that no matter what challenges come our way, we will face them as one. And together, we will build a future of peace, prosperity, and hope. The crowd erupted into applause, and Joran smiled. He had once feared that his people would be lost forever. But now, standing beside the humans, he knew that the Scythians had a future they would shape together with their new allies. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. The victory was complete, but the battle was far from over. The invaders had been driven back, their forces shattered, but Joran knew that the true challenge was just beginning. The Scythians had reclaimed their pride, and humanity had proven to be the steadfast ally they had always hoped for. But now, the task was to rebuild trust, infrastructure, and a future. The days that followed were filled with activity. The people of the planet were working side by side with the humans to repair the damage done by the invaders. The cities, once in ruins, began to take shape again, with buildings rising from the ground and crops being replanted. But it was more than just physical rebuilding. Joran could see that something deeper was happening. The Scythian people were healing, learning, and growing, not just in strength, but in hope. Joran stood on the balcony of the newly restored council building, looking out over the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the horizon. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The war was over. The planet was safe. And for the first time in a long while, he could see the future. His thoughts were interrupted as Captain Hayes joined him on the balcony. "It's hard to believe, isn't it?" Hayes said, gazing out over the city as well, "that just a few weeks ago, this place was on the brink of destruction." Joran nodded. "Yes, it feels like a lifetime ago, but we made it. Together." The two stood in silence for a moment, taking in the sight of the bustling city. The Scythian people were no longer just survivors. They were thriving, rebuilding their lives with the help of their human allies. Joran's heart swelled with pride. It was a moment he would never forget. "Where do we go from here?" Joran asked, turning to Hayes. "Now that the fighting is done, what comes next for us?" Hayes smiled, his expression full of confidence. "Now we build something new. The galaxy is vast, and there are many challenges ahead. But with what we've done here, we've proven that when we work together, there is no force in the universe that can stand against us." Joran thought for a moment. "A new beginning," he mused. "A future where our people can stand side by side, not just as allies, but as equals." Hayes nodded. "Exactly. The future is ours to shape, and I believe that, together, we can make it better for everyone." Joran looked back at the horizon, the golden light reflecting off the buildings. He had once thought his people had been abandoned by the universe, but now, standing here with Captain Hayes, he realized how wrong he had been. They hadn't been abandoned. They had been given a chance to start again, to rebuild, and to make a place for themselves in the galaxy once more. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and Joran turned to see a group of Scythian leaders approaching, their faces filled with determination. The Scythian Council had been reformed, and now, with their leadership, the work of rebuilding could continue. "Joran," one of the council members said, bowing slightly in respect. "The people are ready. They are asking what comes next. What do we tell them?" Joran smiled, his heart swelling with pride. Tell them the truth, that we are not alone, that we are part of something bigger now. The future will not be easy, but together we will face whatever comes. Humanity has stood with us, and together we will rebuild our world. Together we will forge a future of peace and prosperity. The council members nodded, and Joran could see the fire in their eyes. The Xilian people were no longer broken. They were strong, united, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the council members left, Joran stood with Captain Hayes, his heart full. "It's a new beginning," he said quietly. "Yes, it is," Hayes agreed. "And this time, we'll do it right." Joran turned to him, a sense of purpose in his heart. "Together," he said, his voice full of conviction. The future stretched out before them, vast and uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Joran felt confident. The Xilian people had been given a second chance, and with humanity by their side, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Joran knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But with the strength of both the Xilians and humans combined, they would face those challenges head-on. They would shape a future that was brighter, stronger, and more united than ever before. And in that future, Joran knew, the Xilian people would never be abandoned again.